Hi, this is Pilleater. I'd like to discuss a very important controversial topic: queerness and white nationalism, the case against Buttercup do. I love Countercurrents because it was new, informative, and strange years ago. When I first discovered Countercurrents around 2011, 2012, I found a place that had some sound arguments about tradition, race, and how fascism works, right? However, American Renaissance did a better job describing race realism and biological realities in a more Ivy League and professional way that I prefer. So then Countercurrents became a continental philosophical justification of the lowbrow nature of the Daily Stormer, which I am revolted by. I remember when it was once total fascism. Over the years, I have lost interest in Countercurrents because of 1. Highbrow discourse of lowbrow things, and 2. That queers that read Countercurrents, are attracted to it. And they don't have another message other than white survival, but, again, talking through popular culture. It becomes kind of contradictory. How do you become a queer and yet do something good for society? It sounds like you want to be a Republican conservative boy while having your punk rock music as well. But again, it is transgressive to be a Hollywood Nazi, and that's why it is attracting queers. But things got really rotten over the controversial article by Spencer J. Quinn, released earlier this year, around June. Here are some quotes what Quinn says about the movie. Quote, "The Incredibles, in my mind, is a perfect gem of a film which transcends the artifice of merely excellent filmmaking and enters the realm of timeless art. The Incredibles celebrate the sanctity of family and that love that keeps it all together. Basically, it's a white world, and the non-whites in it really like white people. Whenever the filmmakers realize it or not, The Incredibles struck a blow for the right in the culture wars, and it's a brilliant one for that." It seems like the movie has nothing to offer, and some fringe blogger is trying to make sense of it. Then what is even the purpose of reading Countercurrents then? Incredibles 2 was just commercialized propaganda, and here someone is saying that has something to do with Avolian right-wing philosophy, right? Greg Johnson once said that all bloggers on the site all disagree with one another, but I'm starting to believe that this is false. Everybody's in cahoots with Greg Johnson's agenda for white survival and for this agenda of taking weird, eclectic stuff and trying to put meaning through it, like a Trojan horse, and it just doesn't work. There's no meaning. It's shallow. And this was basically the article that made me stop reading Countercurrents for a long time. Yeah, James J. O'Mara was cool for a bit. O'Mara's writing style of Mystery Science Theater 3000 footnotes is funny. It's very postmodern and very punk zine-like. He's been doing it for a long time. His interest in the arts and underground music is really cool. No white nationalists are into homo nationalism like O'Mara. I've met O'Mara a couple of times, and he knows everything from Atari Teenage Riot to whatever music. He really liked God's Girlfriend or Bridget Bratt, which I thought was very amazing. But where is the line in this new right discourse that he's so involved in? It feels like Countercurrents is trying way too hard to be the right-wing version of Verso Books. You might want to call Countercurrents Recto Books, right? If you don't know what Verso Books is, go ahead and do a search and get back to this. It becomes creative writing pleasure reading for postgraduate students. Duh. Sounds sweple to me, right? I was more having an ecstasy reading Green Nazis in Space than learning really anything. Like going in a shopping mall and trying to know what Peter Sloterdijk is and all that jazz, right? So what else does Countercurrents have to offer then? Well, there is Jeff Costello. He's an old drug addict fogey that writes like the New Yorker. We have J.A. Nicole. He's a traditional science fiction fantasy writer that caused some upset feelings with Ramsey Campbell, who did Yalganak. Christopher Cankers, who I really like. He has esoteric knowledge about philosophy and traditional arts with a modernist twist. And Colin Clary is just an old pagan dude. Kerry Bolton, PhD into the far right. He's everywhere. And some older poets and writers that keep things quiet as well. They're all over the place. A clawsbringer. There's not much on the youth arts, and really O'Mara takes the cake as being all this eccentricness happening. But they all have something similar in common with their older people, Gen X or boomers. But young people that read Countercurrents do the same way they read Adam Parfrey's Feral House. Ironically, the white kids who read Countercurrents and expect to be for white identity survival, I mean, I was into that when I was 18, but the point is, it makes you sound eccentric. None of your other peers are doing that in Kansas or Maine, right? It makes you sound a little edgy and authentic. But this draws the line. Buttercup Dew's new book, My Nationalist Pony. It's originally his Tumblr blog. It's not really a book, it's a collection of all his Tumblr posts stitched together so we can read them. But you gotta remember something, SJWs, normies, and queers use Tumblr. God damn it, any girl uses Tumblr. I had a Tumblr for Asianarianism, right? What makes Buttercup Dew so on a pedestal or platform we have to bow down to his esoteric knowledge, right? It sounds like Greg Johnson is just getting some extra bucks for his little publishing house. And again, there's not much to get out of this book other than, one, you as the reader like My Little Pony and the Art of Lauren Faust, and two, you are artistic enough to still think reading Julius Evola is cool in 2018 compared to 2009, people are still in MySpace Music and still reading the William Pierce edition of Savitri Davies' Lightning in the Sun book. But again, it seems that there is this collapse with this worship of cartoons and white nationalism, with Spencer Quinn and his worship for the Incredibles, right? But to take the cake, Buttercup Dew is a queer. And in a 2014 article, Greg Johnson interviewing him, here's what Buttercup Dew has to say. He has an English accent, by the way. On a political level, I identify as a pan-European white nationalist, said by a confused 23-year-old. He's probably a little older now, 26, 27. I was raised as a Christian, became an atheist, became a communist, became a libertarian, became an anarcho-capitalist, became a blue-haired black girl into She-Ra, the Princess of Power, and he's doing it like clothes to wear. How can you trust this guy as a real, sincere white nationalist if he's been through all that, huh? It sounds like the Tumblr music loving is going on, right? Like picking records out, right? Hipsterdom. It was around this time I was coming to terms with being a flaming homo, so I frequent the gay bars around the place. And this is coming from a real homo nationalist, right? He openly said he was gay. And he goes to gay bars, right? He's cool. He's a part of the cult of the extroverts. And Greg Johnson tells us, oh, he grew out of that. Trust me. A Countercurrents friend of mine told me, Emily Yukis, I swear, grew out of punk rock and cork snorting. Really? He snorted. By the way, he snorted coke with her at a friend's basement's house, a Greek friend's basement. But that's a different Philadelphia issue. But yeah, exactly. Why should you trust these queers on Countercurrents, correct? But it's a reoccurring cliche with Greg Johnson's editorial decision as a businessman. Here's a little snapshot of My Nationalist Pony being sold, how he's just praising it to the sky along with James J. O'Mara, the only two people, right? Big words about the new right. But again, this little comment on December 1st, where he, I think, deleted the comment he was replying to, Greg Johnson writes, sadly, Brony-dom even today is far less marginal than white nationalism. My Little Pony is a great example of how our message can be taken to a particular subculture fan scene. There are people who are white nationalists today because of this blog, even though they have grown out of Brony-dom, as has our author. We need 10,000 such projects pushing our ideals into every nook and cranny of the cultural mainstream. Hold on a second. Is Greg Johnson telling me that there are now ex-bronies into white nationalism? This is the part where I want to basically not have anything to do with the disgusting nature of white nationalism. I'd rather be an academic reading American Renaissance than now reading Countercurrents. Again, I would not like to have an autistic peer into that shit, right? I came from punk rock and hipster and queer shit. And Greg's trying to tell me that broniedom is completely a different new thing, right? This is all relative. It's all queer. But today, this is just a sad little outlet that you have to look to autistic people the same way the rightstop.biz thought 4chan was going to be magically far right. But Buttercup Do's Tumblr is a joke, like how leftists try to meme as well. Right? This is a little picture of Buttercup Do's Tumblr with what? The Roman bust, right? And his little cute cat anime thing that follows your cursor. It's like an artsy girl page, right? There's a few leftist memesters that do a better job than Buttercup do. If you remember the Crayola things, rise up, seize the mean of production, attack the day with enthusiasm, or seize the means of production, right? Or Gangster Popeye, who infamously made the cool text collage art stuff. I like that. One's a tranny and the other's a leftist. They do, and the Socialist Party of PSL, they're into these left-wing memes. And then the right just feels like, oh, they can just hijack that and make, I don't know, vapor art or fash wave, that joke. But here's something that a sincere person wrote about the 2014 interview. Harold wrote, I encourage all white bronies to come home and help the Northwest Front to secure the existence of our people and future for white children. He was acting like Harold Covington, who's a bigger queer. And Greg Johnson writes, this is Jack Ryan impersonating Harold Covington, obviously in an attempt to troll. Jack is now banned from commenting here. Right? And there's some policing going on of Greg Johnson just focusing his business on everything. A little digression here. Using that Roman bust, Vaporwave has a far-left postmodern political agenda, not Fashwave stuff, right? As I wrote in my article, Fashwave sectarianism versus Vaporwave hegemony, Greg Johnson helped me with it, to be published on Countercurrents. The far right is stuck in a meme ghetto and thinks by using a Trojan horse, they can convert people onto their side. It's just stupid. It's just going along with the zeitgeist of our time. Greg Johnson rejected my article. He also rejected my article about queer culture on Nita Dalton's Too Long Didn't Read book review. All right, these were supposed to go on Countercurrents, but if you talk about queer culture with Greg, he doesn't like that, but he's certainly okay with advocating Buttercup Do and Emily Eucas and all that bunch. But again, as I said in my article, Macintosh plus a possible tranny, and One of Tricks Point Never, a Russian Jew, they don't see the right as good. Oh, because they're Jewish, right? You can't like them now because they're supposedly Jewish and tainted, yet they have a grasp on youth culture. Countercurrents no longer is talking about art, but white survival. So why should white survival be queer? It just isn't queer. It's just like, again, it's the Richard Spencer conservative boot boys. It's boring. It just doesn't go. And again, here's what Countercurrents has to offer. The worst type of white nationalist writing, David Yorkshire. Yorkshire, who is autistic himself, gets angry over little things that are against white survival. He got upset over my art project, Asian Aryanism, and bitched about how he wasn't feeling good, like he wants to commit suicide. This was back in 2017 on Facebook, where Facebook's full of drama, and his taste in art is pure or just bluntly racist. He's against postmodern art, collage art, abstract art. He doesn't get Rothko. He doesn't get Ellsworth Kelly or Pollock. He thinks in terms of Leonardo da Vinci and this fetishization of European culture. He worships Burzum and death metal European aesthetic over and over again as the real alt-right art. He is the definition of something called a trad fag, right? He's so upset. He doesn't get art. He likes this stupid, transgressive, conservative. He has a poor taste in art, like an autistic kid who wants to play the same game over and over again. Yorkshire is the end of Countercurrents, as the new right becomes a fetishization over boring, cisgendered Thomas Kincaid art. Is it really about white survival now? Or is it just an implant for really bad and out-of-touch conservative traditionalism? It's more than that. Art is more than that. It doesn't have to be a pigeonhole to that. And yet Countercurrents goes with David Yorkshire because, I guess he's for white survival. Doesn't realize that everyone has to like word Drunna or some Viking metal rock or some bullshit like that. I remember a time when James J. O'Mara viewed the work of Haarlan Venison in 2016. He reviewed Haarlan Venison's book Death to the World, an interracial racist love story, which I thought was golden, a real postmodern or post-postmodern collage literature art. And you know what? The far right doesn't get this because I guess they're all Gen X and boomers and into traditionalism and reading a right-wing version of the New Yorker that they don't understand new youth art if it hit them. Or they just ignore what the politically left is doing in the arts and they just call it all degenerate, right? This work isn't degenerate whatsoever. It has the message. You could say it's about white survival, but it's more than that. It's thinking in terms of post-continental philosophy, the return of analytics. It's really deep, right? And just, we have David Yorkshire, who oh yeah, we just gotta ride the tiger and defeat the decadent, shit going on. It's so stupid. It's just a poor understanding of art. And Countercurrents had, good stuff years ago. And so the alt-right is dead, and next will be the new right. As technology will keep growing, there will be other avenues to express anti-liberalism, not just through white survival. Zoomers will be confused looking at Countercurrents. They will reach to something else that they will get, whether this be new music like Blank Banshee or new art with anime girls in it or Undertale, and writing-wise, whether they're going to read tweet fan fiction or some bizarre eclectic writing. The far right is behind in this. They still think in terms of reading Waspian philosophy. They're just they're destroying all the new art as, oh, it's degenerate, or they're trying to, they miss a huge point what's happening right now, right? The new right will die under a business monopoly. And then a future rock star, Sam Hyde was one of them, will say the same stuff, whether it's Julius Evola or capital T traditionalism, as cool hipster stuff, without the need to actually read Countercurrents, making Countercurrents obsolete, meaning things are like a shopping mall. If they're so for Buttercup do and proselytization of reading a hipster children cartoon into white nationalism, it doesn't work because everything now is relative. It's really hurting them in this poor understanding about the outsider and the queer. It's just really stupid. Luke Ford has been planning for this demise. What he's doing, he gets it. He's been through pornography and he's been through the far right. If we are able to be taken seriously, and I mean people who are still invested, actually still reading Countercurrents and anti-liberal stuff and where the far right's going, we have to have a future, philosophy, and space for mixed race people, white allies, and other races. You can't just make this 1488 Nazi state that everyone dreams of. And it can't be just this clusterfuck of unite the right that has happened, right? That's what is happening now. It's stupid. Say no to racism. And I mean this sincerely as a non-shitlib, right? We now don't use racism because we think it's a Marxist word, but racism is true when it comes in fact that it's hurting everyone's self-determination, and race is a future people. How are we supposed to make connections with other races now? We can't just live in a neighborhood, right? It's really stupid, and none of these are answered, and this is really being catered to a nihilistic consumer audience out in the Midwest. What they're really dealing with is queer culture. So you're going to have to make the choice. And there are two brand new albums that have came out. And on the left, we have Def and June's Essence album. And on the right, we have Juju's Girl with Basket of Fruit album. And Def and June, is old esoteric collage art of right-wing spooks of neofolk, right? With songs like The Triggering, right? It's so cliche. He's been doing it now for 20, 30 years, and it still attracts this goth, hardcore hipster audience of still believing that interest in Julius Evola and, Nazism somehow is interesting and cool and collage art, right? Or we have on the choice of Juju's album, where it's this new pornographic, violent, sincere, queer collage art of eclectic post-neo-folk, right? It's not just right-wing memes of totalitarian Leibach imagery, but as well flirting with the real transgressive nature of talking about pornography or sheer violence of Ian Brady, and just sincerely embracing the fact you are a queer for embracing this music, right? Queers listen to Deaf in June, but then they say they're a Nazi just for the transgressive effect. And so we have to make a choice here. Why would you still want to listen to Deaf in June when you know the game is up? It's just old fogies still reading countercurrents for the queer transgressive factor. When you could be with the new young kids in the JJOM and you understand what's really going on right now, where everything is possibly transgressive, not just the right. And so, if anything is to be advanced further, especially if you really want to talk about white survival, or you really want to make sense of the liberal world and still be anti-liberal, make the choice and choose JJOM. I mean, it's just so stupid that if you still choose Deaf in June at this current moment, you're really stuck like with Buttercup do. Thanks for listening. Click the subscribe button at www.youtube.com/pilleater. Subscribe now.